Hey guys, we are at day 8 of Upskill in GCP. Today we are going to see on fancy service, the most foundational service called VPC. So if you are working in an organization and if you go and say to your boss saying that, hey, shall we move our on-prem to a cloud, or shall we move from one cloud provider to the another cloud provider, the first question you would expect is how secure it is. And when people back days moving from the on-prem, which is a local server, to the cloud, that would be the major concern, because if you think from the outer world, GCP is single infra, and all the customers' information or all the customer applications are going to get hosted within that GCP infrastructure. So what if you and your competitor by chance host in the same data center, and if the information gets leaked each other, or what if they get access to your information, how can we protect that? So that's where this VPC, the virtual private cloud, act as a basic foundation for the security right from the beginning. It not just act for the security, it also covers multiple things in terms of the performance and cost. We'll see it in the upcoming sessions. Okay, so what this VPC is going to do is it's going to create a private cloud for you, which means rather avoiding that one, or like having a GCP as a overall infra, we are going to consider it as there is going to be one account, one VPC created for you, and then there's going to be another VPC in parallel. So which means by default, the one VPC can't be communicated to the another VPC by default. So they can't communicate unless you establish the routing and the VPC pairing. So we'll talk more about that in the future. So now you got the basic understanding, like why we do this: to isolate our resources, our infrastructure from the other components, even though they hosted in the same cloud provider, same region, even same data center, even same server, we don't care, right? So to isolate it, this isolation of VPC can be done in the same account. It can be your account. You can have multiple VPCs to isolate the resources, or it can be of two different GCP accounts, one your account and your competitor account, you're isolating it. Okay, that's the fundamental concept of VPC where we begin it. And then the another portion comes for VPC. It's about the region and zones. So in theory, the regions is a combination of more than one zone. So when we say, generally they can call India as a region, and then India can have multiple zones like Hyderabad and Chennai, Pune, likewise. So that the ideal purpose is, if one zone is impacted due to any natural calamity or any power down or any downtime, the other zone can act as a backup for the specific region. That is the ideal reason for going with regions, which is backed by more than one zones. So the VPC, the major component, it's all about networking. So you can't skip IP address, subnets, and core components when it comes to VPC. So here you can have a wider range, and then you can have multiple subnets as part of the VPC. Okay, so the GCP provides you the standard guidelines, like what are the range you can choose, what are the range it's allowed, and what are the tips to be considered when you're going to create with the subnets part. As of today, the IPv4 is the majorly used subnet for all the internal VPC and stuff. So we'll focus only on the IPv4 for today. And if you see, it's going to be the subnets is mapped to a specific region. Okay, so you create a subnet and that will be mapped to a specific region. It's not mapped to a specific zone, to a region, so that it can communicate. And you can have multiple subnets mapped to within the same region. So which means you can have a single VPC, and this single VPC can have multiple subnets, and each subnet can be mapped to each individual region, like region 1, region 2, region 3. And since it's all belongs to the same VPC, by default they could be able to communicate with each other. That is, region 1 could be able to communicate to region 2, region 2 could be able to communicate to region 3. In case in future, if you want to isolate this two region, then we would need to split it into a separate VPC, because as you know, we talked a few minutes back that two VPCs by default, they can't communicate. So in case if you don't want region 3 to communicate to those two region VPC, then you want to split it and move the region 3 subnet to a separate VPC. Okay, so let's start with it. So what are the tips and what are the best practices they're asking us to do? So by default, a single subnet can hold a primary range and a secondary range, and obviously those two range should not like overlap each other. And you can remove and replace a subnet uh, only if no instance. So if you are creating a subnet and you want to remove it, then there should not be no instance mapped to the specific range. And the minimum range you can go with /4, and then you can see about uh, other basics. Anyway, we leave this document to you in the description for you to go through what are the valid range and what are the reserved range and what are the default range allowed by the GCP for a specific region. So everything is being given in the specific guide. I would highly recommend go through this. The another thing apart from the GCP itself, the one standard tool which you might need to explore is the visual subnet calculator. You can use a number of tools available there. So the idea behind is that you put the range and then the subnet mask. It can give you what would be the overall host you can get out of it. So the best policy is that you go with the minimal range or the minimal mask bit. For example, I can go with let's say 32, for example. Then it can come only with like one host, right? So if you need only one system, then it go with like one specific part. And if you keep on reducing the number, the number of range would expand. That's how the network concepts works like. And so this will be like something apart from the subject, like about working the CIDR range, how it works. But you get to understand like it starts from 32 like for one host, and then you keep reducing the number of hosts in expand like 2 power 0, right? So always go with like minimal range of number of need of host, and in future if there's a demand you can expand it. So that's one thing been mentioned in the guide. You can expand the range if needed in the future, but you can't shrink it down in the future. So use it wisely. When you start, always go with the lower range, and you can take it from there if it demands, right? So for any GCP account, you can go to the VPC network. So that's where the specific VPC lies in. And if I go to the VPC, you can see the default one. So every account, to make your life easy, the GCP creates a default one, and it's going to comes with the subnets of all the regions by default. And as seen in the documentation, they're using the same similar range for it. And to get this working, this VPC also comes with something called routes. So routes is going to comes with the rules of saying that uh, which one should go where. So if I click here based on the region, you can see each region is having a specific route, and you could see the destination IP range and then the subnet and where it is going to take you through, and with the priority as well. You also have something called as the firewall. So firewalls is going to control the ports. So for a specific port, who can access the specific port? It can be the default ports, like you have SSH, and then you have the RDP ports. You have if you're going to launch any website, then you would be worrying about ports like 443 for HTTPS. So all those rules which are mapped to the specific VPC are going to come under the specific thing called firewall. And if you see, the default VPC is going to cover only for your the ICMP, RDP, and SSH. Here there is no explicit mentioning about the ports like 443 or 80 ports, which means by default we can't use this port to host a web server. And if needed, you can either add a new firewall rule to allow the specific ports. Let's try creating a VPC. So if you go for the VPC network, I can go here and check for the VPC network itself. Let's give the VPC as a name, and you can give a demo or something as a description. And if you come down, it's going to ask like a create subnet mode. Is this be an automatic or custom? So if you go with custom, you can choose the specific range, like I need only region 1, I need only region 2. Whereas if you go with automatic, it's going to get you created for all the regions of as an individual subnet. As we talked about, each subnet is mapped to a specific region, So if your need is only on, let's say, Asia South 1 and South 2, you don't need to end up creating a subnet range in all the other regions if you're not intended to get your application deployed. So I would highly recommend to go with the custom creation, and then you go with add subnet. You can give the subnet name. For example, you can give it a subnet 1, and you need to map the specific region for the subnet, and you can give the range. So I can give it as, for example, I'll give it as uh, the same example 1, right? So if I calculate it, you can see how much is going to come. If I keep it as 24 and update it, you can see it's going to give me like 254 hosts, and it's going to vary from 001 to 00254. So obviously we won't get entire 254 hosts. There are certain IPs reserved for a specific purpose from the GCP. Again, go and explore the documentation, like which IP and for what. If you see the default firewall rules, it's going to create for the allow port, and you could see the type, targets, protocols, right? So for all protocols, it's going to allow for the specific filter, and 000 is like any IP, irrespective of the range. It can be allowed for ICMP, and here there is no talking about, okay, TCP22 is for the port SSH in generic, and you have this one is for deny all ingress. Okay, by default it's going to deny all the ingress traffic and allow all egress traffic. Ingress is something like from outside to uh, the internet, like outside to the VM, and then egress would be like from your VM to the outside, which is otherwise like uh, if you have the system. So ingress we call it as anything from outside to inside VPC flow, and egress would be like from your VPC to the outer world. Okay, so that's how the firewalls are there. You can go here and edit the specific parts. What other things would be allowed and what other things won't be there. Let's create it. So now it's creating the new subnet with the default routes and default uh, parts. Let's check it out, like how it looks like. We can, once the VPC is created, we can go ahead and edit the existing VPC to add any additional subnets or to increase the range of the existing subnets. So those options is being provided by the GCP by default. And one more thing is the same VPC can be shared to the additional projects if needed. So you don't need to create individual VPC per project, though by default you can map it to a specific project. You can still share it across the various projects. And that's why you could see like subnet in current project. You could see all the projects which is part of the one, and this is the one which we created as part of current VPC, and this has been mapped to the current project. So you can still share it across share the same VPC across like multiple projects. So if you see, we have only one subnet, whereas in the default it's created in like 41 different subnets, which means 41 different regions. And if I go here and I can edit it, and then I can go for subnets, and we should be able to add the subnet, which is to add a new rule in case you want to expand it, or you can go here and edit the specific subnet. So it's all more about like you can play by practically doing in the same way how I'm doing this, and you can again same way you can go to the routes and see like what are the routes being configured per specific region, and in upcoming days we'll talk about like how to make it more secure. So this is going to be very foundational one, like how we can do it. And the same way like you have the firewalls and stuffs around that. Okay, so that's more around in terms of how we can explore. Same way you have something called the VPC network peering. In case if you have two VPC, you can create like go for the specific VPC and choose your VPC. Maybe I can explain the connection between like the default and the new VPCs I created. I can create a pairing. The main thing about the peering here is that the peering should be established between both the VPCs. You need connection from VPC1 to VPC2 and VPC2 to VPC1 to ensure that no one is just initiating a peering connection without your concern as an owner of the VPC. So that's it. More about the VPC. I think we pretty much covered about the fundamentals of VPC, the subnets, and the purpose behind it. And in the upcoming session, we'll more dive deep into it. And where you would see this VPC concept is that if you go for example, the compute engine, and you want to try to launch a specific instance, that it's going to ask you about the specific which region you want to launch, and then which VPC you want to launch. So those kind of details you would be asked. So yeah, so I would highly recommend go ahead and get your basics strong when it comes to the VPC concepts. When I say here VPC, I didn't stress about the GCP, but more about the subnet concepts, because irrespective of which cloud provider you use, which on-prem you are in, the base core concept of networking and subnet comes handy throughout your career phase. Let me know if you want me to make a separate video around that on the subnet itself. I would happy to do that. So comment in the video if you would like to make a detailed video about the subnet part. That's it for the day 8. If you find this video useful, do comment your suggestion, do a thumbs up, and share it with your friends. See you in the next video. Tata from Wasim. Thanks.